Roll call. I gotta get my glasses on so I can see here.
Councilmember Daniel DeGraff. Here. Jake Parks.
Here.
Leo Zuber.
Here.
Vice Mayor Mike Restuccia. Mayor Dean Euchre.
Here. Okay, so the topic of the discussion is 1366 wireless marketing agreement. I guess we'll start with Kevin?
Actually, Stacy.
Stacy?
So what we did after our meeting is went through and created a pretty extensive red line to the draft agreement. This is the template agreement. Kevin was provided a template agreement from 5 Bars. This is what they use as the starting point for all of their deals. And what we did is 2 things. Before I get to the red lines, Katie in our office researched whether or not there were any other companies out there that do this. I think that was Councilmember Restuccia's question. You know, should we be going with just the first person that's approached us, or should we be looking elsewhere? So what Katie found is that, yeah, there are other companies that do this, but not at such a, not to the scope and extent as 5 Bars. 5 Bars is in agreements with a number of cities throughout California, like a ton of them. So it's not just Lathrop and Sacramento. There's a number of them. So that to me put my mind at ease in one respect. We also researched the status of this bill to see whether or not it appears likely that it is going to pass. And what we learned is that in the Senate, it passed with flying colors. There was only one person who voted against it, and forgive me because I cannot recall her name at this point, but it was one senator, and she is, you know, the pro-city, pro-county type senator. And so she obviously was opposed to this because this is something that takes control away from the city. But she was the only person that voted against it. What we did is we reached out to the assembly members' offices, and what we found is that the talk is it's probably going to pass. It's very, very likely that it is going to pass. In terms of the timing, the schedule is that it is in appropriations right now. Let me read the exact discussion so I tell you the right thing. It's in appropriations, and the deadline for appropriations is September 1st. The last day to pass bills is September 15th, so we're not sure where it's going to come up within that time frame. But session for the assembly starts again this Monday, the 21st. So any time between Monday and on, it could pass in the assembly. Then it would go back to the Senate if there were any amendments. So we could have a couple days, but maybe we won't. Maybe this is just going to have to. Maybe it'll pass on Monday. It's a very short time frame. But sometime between Monday and September 15th is the likelihood, and it is likely that it will pass. So with all of that, what we did is created an extensive red line, which basically addressed all of the concerns. I mean, we threw every concern that we could potentially have in there. And surprisingly, very happily surprised, 5 Bars accepted almost every single one of our changes. Okay, there were a couple, though, that they didn't accept. And so I wanted to just talk with you about those real quickly. One of the things that we talked about at the meeting here, and one of the things that we as staff were concerned about, was the scope of this. And so what we had specifically done in our red line is cross out cable companies, internet service providers, streetlight providers, Internet of Things companies, which not quite sure what that is, IoT. I don't know if you probably know what that is.
It's a big thing.
It's a big thing. So, I mean, with cable and internet and all of this, we wanted to make sure that we were limiting this to the small cell wireless sites. So we crossed that out, and 5 Bars came back with a comment that basically said all of these other entities are going to try to utilize Senate Bill 649 to their benefit as well. So what we're going to do is have a phone call with 5 Bars after this meeting and go over any additional concerns that we have and any that you have. And that will be one of them, to try to understand why he thinks that, because we had specifically looked at the definition and what would fall within 649. So we want to confirm whether or not we think it's likely that 649 could be utilized by these other entities. And if so, then it would be staff's recommendation that we would just enter into that agreement. We would allow that to be part of this agreement right now. If we think, if in staff's opinion, after speaking with 5 Bars and just looking at the version of the bill as it is right now, and any amendments that come through, if we think that it needs to be included, we will do that with your permission. Because we think it's better to be protected than have to come back on some emergency situation and have you enter into a new agreement. Or, worst case scenario, come back to you and say, they're covered by 649 and we don't have an agreement, so although we have small sites covered, now we have no control over these other things. Okay? Do you have any questions about that one? Because we can do it piecemeal if you want to ask questions about that.
That was my question, was why internet providers were taken out?
Well, and what we were concerned about is, remember, this is a marketing agreement. So the only way that 5 Bars makes money is if 5 Bars brings people in. So if we limited the scope of the agreement to just wireless, then they would only be marketing to wireless. Whereas if we have internet, cable, all these other things, then 5 Bars could go out and market. We would have a lot more likelihood of people coming in when maybe that's not what the city wants.
But if 649 ends up applying to all of those,
Correct.
the only people we have any control over are the small
Yes.
cell wireless
Yes.
people.
Exactly.
And that makes me nervous.
Well, and that's why I
and
said what we need to do is follow up and research to make sure that we confirm. Katie had looked at it before and said this only applies to wireless, but we will double check that, and we will also look at the specific text and also speak with 5 Bars as to why he thinks others will do that.
Well, and really is the camel's nose underneath the tent. It's gonna be small cell wireless today, but come next session, it's gonna be something different. And, and you know this better than any of us as to when the court gets in there and goes, you say this, but in actuality, it expands to everything. So if we can include everything in now, I think that's our best course and best hedge against the future. Because otherwise, I think Councilman Zuber's right, and you're right as well, is once it gets in there, we have no control.
Yep.
I think initially when we thought it was small cell wireless companies only, we left them all out, not to expand the scope of that, and we still would retain that revenue if they did come to the city, but really to expand. So it's a good point, and we'll talk to 5 Bars.
And I mean, I don't blame 5 Bars for wanting to try to make sure that they can maximize this as much as they can.
Right.
Yep.
So,
If the other industries are able to use that technology, eventually they'll fall under it, just based on the fact that it's the technology. So they don't necessarily have to be using their technology and fall under their industry. They may fall under it just because they're able to use the equipment.
Yeah.
So.
And again, the point of all of it is we want to have as much control on our own as we can. And so at the beginning, we were thinking, no, let's take all that out so we control. So we will address that with them, and given the consensus, if this remains the consensus, if it is appropriate to include them, we will make sure that that's included. The next thing that they did not accept all of our changes on was the indemnification language. And essentially what we said is, this language says that 5 Bars is going to indemnify and defend and hold the city harmless if there's any sort of claims that are made as a result of 5 Bars activities under this agreement. That's the way that they have it. We expanded the scope, of course, in our proposal to apply to anything that arises out of or relates to this agreement. And what we wanted to do was make sure that, if we have somebody that sues the city because they're claiming that there's an issue with a cell site, that 5 Bars is the one that funds that litigation, because this is all arising out of and relating to that agreement. Not just what 5 Bars is doing in marketing, but the agreement's implementation, which is really where the city could potentially be named as a party. And so they basically wrote back and said, we don't make enough money off of these deals to fund that type of litigation if there is a litigation. So essentially their proposal back to us in their revisions was, if you decide as a city that you don't want to defend litigation or you don't want to have any participation in that, just cancel your agreement, cancel the sublease agreement with the wireless carrier. And Kevin and I have been talking about that, and first, we haven't seen the sublicense agreement yet, but we will make sure that the agreement, if it doesn't already say it, and I think it does, that the agreement requires them to have the city's approval of any sublease agreements. That's the first thing that we're going to do to protect the city. The second thing that we're going to do to protect the city is ensure that those agreements between 5 bars and like Verizon or whoever the carrier is, includes indemnification language so that Verizon, AT&T, whoever that company is, that's the one that indemnifies the city. Because those are the ones that have the money and financial ability to do so. So what we'd like to do is, again, talk with Kevin about this, and then we'll make the language appropriate to protect the city. And then, speaking.
Does it say in there now with those agreements that we have to approve them?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. I'm sure that it does. I just didn't have an opportunity before we walked in here to point to that specific section. But if it doesn't explicitly say it already, which I think it does, we will make sure it says that. And then, speaking of their compensation, they proposed a 65%, 35% split, with the city getting 65% of the income that they receive. We expanded the scope of what defines income in here. And the other thing that we did is tried to change the split to 75-25, because that's what they've had in some other agreements. They wrote back and basically said that one's non-negotiable. They want 65-35 split. So from our perspective, yes, it's 10%, and yes, that would be beneficial. But if that's the deal breaker, we're not going to push on that if the council's okay with that. So those were, they had another question about assignment, but I can explain that if you need to. But nothing else was substantively different. So what we would like to do today is answer any questions that you have about the agreement. And then as you're thinking through this and asking any questions, ultimately what we would ask for is the council's approval for staff to continue to negotiate with 5 bars and to put the agreement in a form that's approved by the city attorney's office based on all of your input, and without any major substantive changes. Then the mayor would be authorized to sign the agreement. If there was some sort of major substantive change that we thought fell outside the scope of what we've already talked about, we would have to bring back to you. Does that make sense? Okay. Leo, you had some questions. You want me to address those, or?
Yes.
Okay. So one of the questions that you asked is, for the sub-license agreements, how long are those going to last? And the language that we put in there was language that would confirm that any sub-licenses that they enter into have to terminate as of the date that this agreement terminates. Because we don't want to have a sub-license out there where they're still getting money under this agreement, where 5 bars is still getting money under this agreement, and now we have this agreement that could go on for 10 or 20 years. So, yes, the subleases would have to, or sublicenses would have to terminate as of the date of this agreement terminating. Okay?
Okay, then that leads to the other question, which was, all right, so they end.
Yes.
Does that mean the person or entity has to get their stuff out?
So
and
what
go
we have
out
in this
of
agreement is
business?
that they have 30 days, that 5 bars has 30 days to remove and ensure that all of the equipment that's been installed is removed. Now, practically speaking, what's gonna happen? So say we end this agreement in 5 years, because we have the ability to do that. We made a short 1-year term, and then we changed the term to like 2-year
2
renewals, I
years
think.
for 5,
Yeah.
10 renewals.
So say we end this in 5 years, and Verizon is here. And Verizon could approach the city and say, hey, I'd like to enter into a separate agreement with you. Here's the deal terms that we'd like to propose. And in which case, then maybe the equipment wouldn't be brought down. But otherwise, no, when this agreement ends, you have 30 days to make our property to the same condition as it was before this agreement started.
So we couldn't do that as long as this agreement was in place. But if this ended,
Correct.
it would sort of, then does it all revert back to the city?
Yeah, so all the property is still remaining the city's property. All they're doing is basically, if this is a light post, they're gonna have the ability to, stick something on there. So when the agreement's over, they're gonna have to take that off,
Okay,
right?
Is
Is
now,
that how you see it?
Yeah,
Yep.
they're just
given
leasing.
that 649, assuming it passes, 649 says they don't have to ask us.
Right, once the agreement's terminated, then they'd be able to do whatever they wanted, right?
But under this agreement, we are requiring 5 bars to ensure that everything comes down. So if this agreement has the effect that everybody is hoping that it has and that everybody's intending that it has, it doesn't supersede 649, but it controls the terms of the ability of these carriers to come in as long as this agreement's in place. So once this agreement's in place, though, if 5 bars didn't go out and do what we said and remove that property, then we would have an action against 5 bars. So could they technically, if 649 has this expansive power, could they come in the next day and just put it up again? Sure. But we want to still have the control to say, you need to take it down, because we don't know what's going to happen between now and 5, 10, 20
So then
years.
the question would become for Verizon, okay, how much is it gonna cost to take all this crap down and then the next day put it back up? Or is it worth going to the city of Ripon and saying, can we just leave it there and let's work that out?
Yeah, and again, we'll have to
Okay.
see where we are at that time, because who knows where we're gonna be. If this agreement lasts 21 years, who knows what's
God,
gonna
yeah.
happen by then?
Yeah.
You know, we could be, everything could be
I
done by
won't worry about
satellites
it.
instead of on, poles.
Yeah.
What,
Yeah, it'll be pinpricks for everything.
question, 5 bars, thought that they were a marketing, okay, so, but then you made a statement that 5 bars is gonna come in and physically take this stuff down.
They have to ensure that it's removed.
Somebody will.
Okay, that's correct.
Yeah.
So I'm just making sure that I was thinking right. So they would have to make sure the company that put it up, took it down, it's their responsibility. Okay. All right,
Correct.
all right. So I was thinking right, but.
One of the things that, another question that Leo had was whether or not 5 bars has to get the city's permission to remove things that are in the city's, in their way. Is that what you were saying?
Not in that, yeah.
Okay, so basically what what this says is if there's something that 5 bar says, hey, this tree or this bush or something's in our way, then they have to come to us and talk to us about it and get our permission before they go in. They can't just start hacking away at our equipment or at our vegetation, anything like that.
Okay.
The other question you had is something about the real estate taxes, which was referenced in here. So what's referenced in here is California Revenue and Taxation Code 107.6. And what that code says is if any public agency like us, a local government agency, enters into a contract with a private party, and that could turn into some sort of possessory interest, which here we have the right for them to occupy our facilities. If that is going to basically cause a tax to be imposed, we have to have this specific language that's in the agreement, which is in the statute, in this agreement to say that they're responsible for it. So that's form language that's required by the Revenue and Taxation
Doesn't mean
Code.
that there's gonna be a tax.
Correct.
It just says if there is.
If there is,
Okay.
it's not our responsibility, it's their responsibility.
Okay.
Another interesting question, which I love because everybody needs to learn this, is can another public agency exercise the power of eminent domain against the city? And the answer is yes. But there are certain circumstances that have to be met. So essentially, the other public agency would have to say that their public use, the reason why they want to exercise eminent domain over a piece of our property, which is already public property, is a higher and better public use than what we're using it for. So if we're using it for a street and they say, no, we have to build an interchange, for example, then they would have the ability to do that. So yeah, that was a really good question because a lot of people don't know that.
And if I remember what it says is if eminent domain is exercised, either we have to talk to 5 bars and either 5 bars can say, fine, we'll let the property go, but we want to keep going. Or 5 bars can say, if we can't have that, this whole agreement's null and void.
Exactly. And that's
Okay.
super typical in lease agreements is if eminent domain occurs, the person who's leasing it needs to be able to say, can I really still do what I intended to do with this modification to the property? So very typical, not
Okay.
concerned about that. And then the last question I think is, that had to do with
We
the
already
removal
talked
of the
about it.
property.
Yeah.
So those are all the questions that you had initially. Any other questions?
Well, the only one was the one in general. If we enter into this agreement and Verizon were to come to the city and say, hey, we're thinking about doing this and we'd like to put something over there, we have to send them to 5 bars. We can't do anything.
We sure do. This is an exclusive marketing agreement, so anybody that comes here needs to go through 5 bars, which is part of the reason also why we were a little bit concerned about, expanding the scope unnecessarily. Because why would we want to give away 35% of the income when we're perfectly capable of negotiating with these companies? So the only reason we would want to expand it is if we were really forced to by the law. But otherwise, they would have to go through
Well,
that.
if we don't make an assumption now, we can, if we don't do it now, we potentially could never do it.
Potentially, yep. Exactly. Any other questions?
I guess it wouldn't really matter if it passes one way or the other, but what if, say they pick a light pole, they wanna put something on, or a pole that's in a spot where we decide we're gonna redevelop and move something around, do we have any ability to say, we're moving this, you need to move your equipment, or do they have rights to stay where they're at?
So we created, that's a really good question. What we put in here is language that ensures that, what we're gonna do is basically sit down with them and map out the city and identify areas in which we think that this equipment would be most suitable. So we get to pick those areas, we get to pick things like phasing, because we say all the terms and conditions under which the equipment can be installed. So what Kevin and I talked about was, and it was totally Kevin's idea, so give him 100% of the credit, is ensuring that we have the ability to say, okay, we only want it like on these streets right now. Then potentially we'll expand the scope. And we also put language in here that says that we have the ability to essentially change that map anytime we want to or need to. So, yeah, so we would have the ability to do that. We'd have a lot of power as part of that, what they call marketing plan.
And when they come through, they'll do a radio frequency study. So they'll drive all the streets to see where the worst,
Where the dead spots
receptions
yeah.
are, and so a lot of it will be based off that, but as much as possible, we're gonna identify a list of assets that are gonna be made available for them to go out and market.
And we can remove, add to, or
Right.
delete, from that list as the city sees fit. Because again, the city is here for the good of the public, so there may be a very important need to change something.
But, going back to what Daniel's original question was, if we have given them permission to put something someplace, and they have put it there, and then something comes up and we have to change it.
So
We're stuck, aren't we?
No, I believe that we have the ability to change the scope at any time. But I will make sure that the language specifically addresses that concern. And I don't think that they would have a problem with that as long as, we're not doing it to, defeat the purpose of the agreement. It would have to be for a legitimate city's
Right.
purpose.
We probably need to have that in the sublease agreement.
Right, and we probably have more protection with this agreement than if you didn't do it. If you just, under the law, they'd probably have more leeway to do whatever they wanted.
Right, that,
So-
yeah, that's exactly right, and that's why we were so careful, trying to be as strategic as we could, still in accordance with the law, but, trying to give
Protect
ourselves
ourselves and
as
give
much
ourselves
control as we could with 649.
No more questions? Do we wanna, I've noticed that we have a young lady from the public here. Should we, do you have anything you wanted to add?
Oh, I'm here because, I was, interested in the topic, and, also, I don't know if you know about Kelly Prime. She's trying to get the cell towers at Weston moved in Ripon High School, and she was asking people to attend the meeting, and, since I sort of heard about this last minute, I don't really understand all of it, and I'm not gonna ask you to go over it again for me, but, from what I understand, so they're voting on this bill in Assembly, is it today? Or sometime?
Monday, possibly
Well,
Monday.
Monday's session opens up. but
Anytime
it's-
between Monday and the 15th of September.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so, and you're trying to, and they're going to be able, if the bill passes, they're going to be able to, what I heard is put, little cell towers on light poles wherever they wanna put them in every city throughout California, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
What if, can the individual county, I
That's what you wanna answer that?
Sure, so, yes, I do believe that there is opposition from cities and counties, but, if it passes so it already passed in the Senate with all members voting in favor of it except for one, is what we were told. And so now it's gonna go to the Assembly, and everything that we have been told is that the Assembly is likely to pass it as well. So do we have a voice? Yes, we have a voice, but it may or may not be heard. And unfortunately, it sounds like this is likely to pass.
Okay, so you're trying to, enter into an agreement with 5 bars so that you would have some control over where these are placed? And for example, you were saying that you may be able to say, if you only wanted them placed along Main Street, and you may be able to do that, but you're not exactly sure about the particulars of the agreement yet until you're done negotiating with them, or?
Well, we're pretty close on the details, but in terms of the location, that's in the city's, the way that the agreement is drafted, the city gets to decide where it goes. So it's not something that 5 bars can come in and say it has to go here. The city defines the areas where, the sites can be placed, and also the timing. So we can create phases and say, for this many months or years, they'll only go here. And then we could expand the scope later.
Where if we didn't have the agreement, they'd be able to do whatever they want, wherever they want.
Wild West, yeah.
Well, basically, we're really trying to
My
take that.
question was, okay, so, like, I know we're going to need to have a certain amount of wireless coverage in town, and I don't know, if the general public thinks it's not good enough at the time, for the time being, but, what I was wondering, is this agreement going to bring in a lot more well, I guess it would, but what I'm saying is, are we going to have a lot more of the harmful radio frequency in the air because of this agreement? Because I'm assuming we will, because that's their name, 5 bars, right? They're gonna try to make it so everybody has 5 bars if possible, so.
Mr. Zuber,
But I'm wondering, I'm just
respond to that.
trying to weigh in my mind, is it worse to enter into this agreement or to do nothing? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
The agreement itself is not going to affect how fast that sort of service comes in. It's not gonna affect the quality. What this agreement is for is so that the city can exercise some control over where this stuff goes. This law that is being passed basically takes all that away and allows the company to come in and put the stuff wherever they want, whenever they want. And we don't want to lose that. The only way we can stop it, 5 bars doesn't exist to, well, it could, I guess, but it's doesn't exist to generate the business. What it exists for is to be the middle person between the city and the business to get the stuff in here. It's possible, this agreement will last 21 years. It's possible that in 21 years, nothing will happen here. Not probable, but it's possible. It's possible that for the next 5 years, nothing will happen because the coverage in town is fine for everybody and there's no point to coming in here. The company's not gonna come in here and build a bunch of stuff until they need to. So we're not encouraging or discouraging, we're just controlling.
Well, I was wondering because on Facebook, on the Ripon page, she said, go to this meeting unless you want a, cell tower outside your house, and, which I know that's what the state law is supposedly proposing, but I didn't understand why, she wanted people to come to this meeting, because it seemed to me that what you were doing was a good thing if you passed this, but like I said, I didn't really know.
We think it is. We're trying to address that very issue.
I think neither option is good. It'd be
No.
ideal if they didn't pass the law is the ideal situation, but.
I think the comments on Facebook are misleading. Is that the proper?
I haven't read the comments, so I'm not sure.
Her latest, you're referring to the post that she put yesterday or
Yeah,
yesterday
that big
evening
long
or?
one.
I'm sorry, I'm definitely
Are you referring to the post that she put yesterday evening, I think, is the one that, about?
She just said that you guys are having an emergency meeting, and then she put she posted a flyer about the state law, and then, and it just, then there was a flyer about this meeting, but it didn't really say anything else. She just said, attend this meeting unless you want, a cell tower in front of your house. So, that's why I thought, well, maybe the agreement that you're proposing with 5 bars, maybe that would, maybe you would still allow that, everybody to have a cell tower in front of their house, because I don't know what the agreement would allow. I don't
Do
know
that. I can make
if
money
you were
off that.
trying to just maybe be able to get more money out of the deal.
remember that.
By entering into
I'm
the
gonna
agreement,
remember
or-
that.
Yeah, no, it's, like Leo said, it's really just to give us more flexibility and ability to regulate it, where if we don't have the agreement, then we're at the mercy of whatever company wants to do whatever they want to do. So, and like I said, both options aren't ideal for what the city would like to have. We'd like to have the control over all of it and be able to decide what we'd want to do. But if the law passes, the better option is to have the contract, so we actually do have a little bit of ability to regulate it.
And then, as I understand, let's assume that we put this agreement in place, law doesn't pass. The worst we have is we have to live with this agreement for 1 year. 'Cause
Correct.
after that, it's renewable, and we just say, no, we don't want to renew it.
The other part of that, we can limit the city assets to only industrial areas or commercial
Right.
areas. We can really limit that. If the law passes, obviously, we're gonna have to expand that list of
Right.
assets. But that's why we're wanting to phase it. Until the law passes, it's gonna be a very limited set of city assets that are gonna be available.
Right, there's no point in kind of playing your hand right now. You want to leave yourself as many options as you can in the
Right.
future.
Yep, so if the
So-
law passes, that asset list goes
Yeah.
open, but for now, we'll phase it to be very limited until it
Yeah.
does.
And the other thing to keep in mind is there's not a specific time frame in here for when we will enter into that marketing agreement or enter, to
Right.
define the scope.
not gonna
So
happen overnight.
we'll know if the law passes before we finalize that agreement.
Okay,
You ready for a motion?
yes, I believe so. Wait a minute, Chief, are you awake over there? I'm awake. You have anything you want to add to the,
And I did notice there's a thing in there that we do control, that they can't put things in that are gonna cause a problem for him, or the fire department, or the city either.
Yep,
Emergency
exactly.
services.
Yeah.
And that's all I would say, as long as it doesn't interfere with our current wireless network throughout the city or interfere with the camera system and so forth. But other than that, I don't have any comment.
Then I will make a motion that we direct the city attorney and the city administrator to complete negotiations with 5 bars, incorporating any issues that were brought up at this meeting, and authorize that the mayor sign the agreement, assuming no substantial changes are made in the agreement that was presented today.
I'll second that motion.
well, I'm trying to get, my computer went down. Do we need to do this on the computer?
Yeah.
Okay, so vote.
Password again?
Oh, wait,
It's not
where's
letting,
mine?
it's not letting the vote come
What are
up.
you doing? Hey, you gotta log back in too.
Oh, God. Oh, don't I get to pick my name? Oh,
Okay, so, whoops.
it's incorrect.
Is it 5, 4, 3, 2, 1?
Isn't it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5?
Well, mine's
Oh, what
still
is it?
showing mover.
Yeah, so.
What is it here?
Wait, did you click move there, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, I was trying to think I was gonna get around it, so how do I get it off?
Okay, well,
it's gonna
because
be
we
the same
can't
as
do that,
mine.
can we?
Oh.
Because Leo was officially the person who moved.
Okay,
So what was it?
so now you need to hit the move, right?
Okay, so,
PW4?
yeah,
Oh,
yeah. I
You
know.
need to
We
hit mover.
all right, I got it.
And then, Jake, you need to hit
Then I hit
second.
second.
And, okay, now you can vote.
Yep.
Lisa's messed it up again. Is it all done?
Yeah, just need everybody to, who hasn't voted yet.
On the right-hand side.
Vice Chair Mastrucci.
Oh, okay, there we go. Yeah.
Passes 5-0.
4-0.
4-0.
Oh, I mean 4-0 with the absence. Yeah, sorry. I should have, I took my glasses off. I should have left them on.
Every change you make, and then there's only like 2.
Well, I hope you know, the bad thing about this whole thing is it's a necessary evil.
Yeah, so
I was
If-
pleasantly surprised.
You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
so, I mean, I can see the revenue thing. I mean, yeah.
I would just make the comment that you.
It's all government money and, you know, the bottom line.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, and for them.
I would say
it's
reach
really
out
hedging-
to your assembly
hedging
member.
bets.
okay,
Right now,
you guys can go
Senate
home
member,
now.
have
It's
everybody
Friday.